I'm Dr. Donna Case from the University of Michigan, Flint. I'm going to start sharing my screen. So Angie, you can introduce yourself while you'd like to.
Hi, I'm Angela Blanchard. I work for Michigan Rehab Services Business Network Division, and I am an occupational therapist. Welcome.
And I apologize, it's going to take a minute for it to share. I have a ton of things saved on my computer. Nothing else is open. I was hoping we'd get there faster, but it takes time. All right, there we go. Can everyone see our presentation? So I am also an occupational therapist, and Lisa Bartley, who is part of the Michigan Rehabilitative Services, was unable to attend this morning to help us, but she was a big part of putting this presentation together. So we're going to talk today about things such as disability awareness, what is Michigan Voc Rehab, how you can have good disability etiquette. We're going to talk about designing your environment so that people with disabilities can access your services, as well as assistive technology devices that might be helpful for some of your clients. We're going to look at resources for job seekers, and then we're going to intersperse have some case studies throughout that you'll have a chance to be able to be part of determining the problems and the solutions. Oops. Angie?
Okay, so for today's agenda, we will be, as Donna said, talking about disability awareness, Michigan vocational rehabilitation with Michigan Rehab Services, the disability etiquette, inclusive environments, case studies, all of those things. So starting out with what is Michigan Rehabilitation Services? Most of you, I'm sure, are very familiar with our state agency, but here is our vision: a diverse and inclusive workforce that unites businesses and individuals with disabilities towards a common good. And that makes us one of your core partners as well.
So now is when you want to be ready to set up your poll everywhere. So you can participate by sending a text message, visiting the URL from any web browser, and you don't need to download it. If you don't wish to, you can connect at pollev.com/DonnaCase540. We're not grading you on these. We're just using it to move the conversation along. So you can, when you go to your phone, you can do poll everywhere, pollev.com, and then you've got my name there. And then that will give you, as we go into some of the different polls, you'll have an opportunity to be able to answer what you want to do. Okay. So our first poll is, what comes to mind when you hear the word disability? I like it. So we have physical handicap, a person with a disability, can't, mental disability. I'm assuming that's where that comes from. Someone perhaps in a wheelchair. Absolutely. Physical can be difficult, doing things physically, unable, perhaps mentally, absolutely. Hopefully we're gonna cover and broaden it really well, what we're talking about, but a resulting condition, yes. Barriers, absolutely. So you'll see as the words get bigger, that's because more of you have used those same words. So mental, physical, and wheelchair are really big words, and now we've got mental, yep, still there. Okay, so you can see You all have lots of, and they're all around the same themes, just stated slightly differently. Okay. So we think about a disability and we ask ourselves that question, what is a disability? We're going to be talking about disability in context of the Americans with Disabilities Act. And under the ADA, disability is a legal term. It is not a medical term. And so when we look at that federal law, the ADA says a person with a disability is a person who has either a physical or a mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities. And that could be a person who's had that impairment previously, but no longer has it now, or it could be people who are perceived as having a disability, even though they don't actually have that disability. And the Americans with Disabilities Act tells us and reminds us that it's unlawful to discriminate against a person based upon their disability.
So what is vocational rehabilitation? Well, our purpose is to help individuals with disabilities get and keep a suitable job. So once they meet eligibility requirements, they are assigned to an MRS counselor. And that counselor is tasked with helping that customer or job seeker identify an appropriate job goal, one that meets their abilities, perhaps their prior education or work history, taking into consideration personal choice and interests, and helping to decide what services are needed to become job ready, and then helping with the job search. MRS is an eligibility-based program, as we mentioned, and so that means it's based on the following: the existing physical or mental impairment, vocational or work-related barriers related to that disability, and the services must be essential to finding employment. And we ask, can the person benefit from both rehab that will lead to employment? So you might notice that we, as core partners, do offer some overlapping services. MRS is based on the individual's needs. So if you're seeing what's highlighted here in yellow, notice that we may overlap in some of our services. So job seeking, skills training, accommodations, assistive tech, the tools, equipments, or licenses needed to become successful in employment, job training, support services such as interpreters, readers, or transportation. And then the big one in blue there is job placement services. MRS can also help to fund and provide job coaches, prostheses, or other medical services, and communication with health professionals and continued advocacy. So as you may notice, we are also working under the same legal framework, the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, or WIOA, which increases access to high quality workforce services for individuals with barriers to employment, including people with disabilities. To support that mission, the American Job Centers reflect a welcoming environment by providing the accommodations necessary to benefit all customers. So that is the aim of WIOA. And under WIOA, when it's broken down statistically, we see that 32% of adults with the disabilities have mental or psychiatric disability. 43 or almost 44% have a physical or chronic health condition. About 19% have a physical mobility impairment. And about 4% fall under the category of having a learning disability. You also might notice that many of our customers fall under what is known as ALICE, and that means asset limited, income constrained, but employed individuals. So some of the characteristics we might see associated with individuals who fall under the ALICE category may be a lack of job skills, maybe multiple family care responsibilities, children, caring for elder adults, physical and mental health problems, including substance abuse, perhaps limited English proficiency, lack of reliable transportation, and high childcare costs. Michigan has the second lowest income limit for childcare subsidy eligibility in the nation. And when we look further at these disability employment statistics, we notice that many individuals who do not currently have a disability that affects their ability to be successful on the job may develop a disability later in life. So 25% of 20-year-old individuals will acquire a disability before reaching retirement age. About 19% of persons with a disability are employed. And so that means 80% of persons with a disability are not in the labor force. So we're seeking to assist in reducing that number. And so that brings us here to our first case study. Now, this is an actual referral that came to MRS. So this customer had sustained a brain injury while at work and had been receiving, it was a significant injury. So they had been receiving services, inpatient rehab, outpatient rehab for about a year. And it was determined that this individual was ready to return to work. And all we knew when we got the referral was he tried to return to work and was unsuccessful the first time without MRS services. So we had reached out to the business, but the business was a little, iffy about us coming in because of the sensitive nature of this individual's job in like an IT type of role. So the OT completed the initial eval in the MRS office. So we're asking on the poll everywhere, what barriers might this person face and what could be put in place to help? And Donna, if you're able to see the answers and can read them, I'm not able to see them.
I will. Nobody's responded yet, but I will.
Okay. So we asked you to go into the poll everywhere and tell us what barriers might a person with a brain injury returning to a position 1 year later potentially face? Maybe you're thinking along the lines of.
So we have, Angela, we have memory retention, coordination, learning tasks, communication, mobility, memory issues, and it's depending on what is being asked of the individual.
Right.
Memory, organization, emotional regulation. Memory issues, slower mobility. Diminished understanding and ability to respond. Possibly a job coach could help.
Excellent. Yes, all excellent answers there. You're definitely on the right track there.
Judgment by others, uncertainty and stress by the disabled worker.
Excellent. And I want to take that judgment from others answer and incorporate that into what had actually happened here. So we ended up, the counselor, myself, the OT, business relations consultant, we all met with the business. So that included management and human resources. And it was simply to seek information. We wanted to know from the business perspective, what's going on here. And we ended up providing a report with recommendations for strategies and accommodations. And as it turned out, there was a little bit of a lack of awareness about the effects of traumatic brain injury can have residual effects. And the other staff was concerned that this gentleman was, and I'll put it in quotation marks, not like he used to be or not himself. And that led them to be concerned that perhaps he wasn't recovered enough because he had some personality changes. But when we actually sat down with the business and we asked, well, is he performing the job duties? Yes, he was performing his essential job functions. We asked, is he being bothersome in any way or inappropriate in any way? Sometimes we see those frontal lobe changes in TBI, and it was determined, no, he was not disrupting anybody. He was just not himself. So we educated the business about some of the residual effects of TBI, provided some strategies, and that including some of those memory strategies, the job coaching options. And we were able to have his neuropsychologist also work with us and sign off on that return to work. And this customer has been back at his being successful at his position for over 2 years. So we're excited about that. Okay, so next we're going to talk about 10 guidelines for interacting with a person with a disability. And we have a short video for you to watch here. And I'd like you to just notice what you're watching here, maybe make a few notes of what you're seeing, and then we'll go over it at the end.
I've got to move over to sharing the video, so it'll take a minute there. Chrome tab. Here we are. Share audio. Can you see it?
Good morning, Bob.
Morning there. And morning, Alice.
There's no need to be awkward.
Poor Bob. Like so many of us, he just doesn't know how to interact with people with disabilities.
It's pretty easy, really. People with disabilities are people first.
We need the same things that every person needs, like respect.
Good morning, everyone.
Attention. Okay. Maybe we need to be more specific.
The easiest way to show respect is to focus on the person, not the disability. It's okay. You'll get the hang of it.
One easy way to focus on the person is to watch the person signing and not their interpreter.
Or their companion.
It's really cool that you'd like to help, but do us both a favor and please ask me first. What you think might be helping?
I got you.
Wait, oh no, might actually not.
If you'd like to offer me help, let me hold on to your elbow. Don't take mine.
Hey, would you like to take my arm?
Sure.
Assistive devices help us to live our lives. They're really important and really personal.
Grabbing them only makes it weird for everyone.
What? Please only touch our devices and service animals if we've given you permission. And don't take it personally if I ask you not to. Remember that my service animal helps me all the time. Neither of us would like it if we were separated.
Remember, we make our own decisions. We sign documents, vote, volunteer, work, and pay taxes.
We get married.
So don't underestimate me just because I have a great smile.
Just because I'm blind
May I help you?
does not mean I'm deaf.
No, I think someone's gonna come. Just because I'm deaf doesn't mean I'm blind.
And just because I use a wheelchair doesn't mean that I can't sweep you off your feet.
So take a deep breath, relax. We don't bite.
Unless we're really hungry.
Hello there, ladies. How are you?
Hello. And if you're not sure what to do, just ask.
Hi, would you still like to see a menu?
No thanks, but can you please read it to me?
Sure, definitely.
Just treat us the way you would want to be treated, and we'll all be okay.
Oh, good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning, Alice.
Right.
Awkward no more. Nice job, Bob. Go forth and be human.
There's no need to be awkward.
Okay, so what did you think of that video? What were some of the things that you were noticing there? Perhaps you noticed to speak directly to the person, greet them naturally. If somebody has a visual impairment, say what you see. Offer assistance, but don't assume that assistance is needed or take it upon yourself to do something that might be detrimental. Treat adults as adults. And really, as the gentleman said at the beginning, treating people as you would any other person, respecting their personal space, respecting equipment or mobility devices, talking eye to eye whenever possible and feasible, and help those who may not hear well, listen and be patient. And finally, just relax. The more you get to know somebody, of course, the more comfortable you'll naturally be with them.
It looks like, Angela, we had some very observant people in our watching our video.
That's great.
So we're going to talk a little bit now about invisible disabilities. And I think We're probably more comfortable with the disabilities that we can see. We recognize that there's a disability. If someone's in a wheelchair, we know, okay, they probably have mobility issues. If someone has a cane, we know that perhaps they have a vision impairment. But our invisible disabilities are often very difficult to see. We've got quite a list here, and if you think about things such as, anxiety, and we've all, I think, during this time of COVID, at one point or another experienced an increase in anxiety in our lives, let alone people who have that as a diagnosis. Depression, schizophrenia. There are many things, chronic fatigue syndrome, rheumatoid arthritis, that you can't necessarily tell by looking at someone, but they will impact how they interact with you and how they're going to interact with an employer at an interview or once they are employed. So it's important to know those things. So let's do another poll everywhere and just think about what kinds of behaviors or scenarios come to your mind when you think about job seekers who come to your service center who might have a mental health disability. Oh, yes, individuals with PTSD, you're absolutely right. And I suspect you're going to be seeing a lot more of that as this pandemic continues on. They can get frustrated because of the process, absolutely. Organization might be really difficult for them. They might have a difficulty being able to wait. A lack of insight, yes. I've worked with people, and a woman that I knew who had a closed head injury, remembering what the neuropsychologist told her was in 7 years she would be all back to normal. And I worked with her about 10 years after it, and I could tell her she wasn't. That was probably not what the neuropsychologist said. I suspect what he said was, you're going to get most of what you get back in that time. So responses that you might not expect are responses that don't make sense unless you know about the barrier they're facing. Absolutely. When you start to interact with these individuals and the way that they respond doesn't make sense, for me, that's kind of a aha moment. Maybe there is some hidden disability, a mental health illness that we are not aware of. Okay. So what might it look like? Some of the things that you see, you might find they're very hard to focus. They might have a real volatile temperament. They might be very happy one moment and very irritable and angry the next. Some of you already talked about concentrating, remembering, and making decisions. They might be very fatigued. And I think if you think about the fact if they can't remember what has gone on before, that would be very frustrating and difficult and require a lot of your energy to try and make sense of the world. Certainly they can be easily distracted by things going on in the environment. One of my friends says it's the squirrel phenomena is how she describes herself. She said you can be doing a list in your head of things that need to be done, but you see a squirrel go by and all of a sudden you're following that squirrel. So understanding that piece. Also remembering the abilities to remember what you've talked about and like what are the next steps that person has or is able to look like. So how do we help those individuals be successful? You need to break things down into very small goals, providing written information for that individual so that they can take it with them when they leave and reflect back upon what it is that this is the goals that we've decided upon. Here's what we did today. Maybe even some checklists for that person. So here's your to-do list. Check off as you finish them. This next one is really important. If they are not calm, they're relying on you and I to help them get it back together. So we need to be calm. We need to be relaxed when we're talking to them. We cannot allow, however frustrating they might be, to come forth in what we're saying, because that's only going to make it worse for them. And you also need to recognize when are the signs that they or you need to take a break. We might need to revisit this. We may not be able to finish everything in the session we would like to. And you're going to have to provide that structure perhaps for them to help them stay on one topic at a time, reminding them, oh, let's go back to what we came to talk about. When you see inappropriate behavior, it's important to address it, but not to link it to the person. The person wasn't inappropriate, the behavior was. I like to say, how would an employer, a potential employer, interpret that information? It's okay for you to say no, and even though they have great amount of needs, you need to avoid taking on too much because we need to help them facilitate them becoming more independent. So setting those boundaries, keep it employment focused, knowing what your resources are, and reminding them as need be on what you can and can't do.
And so it's important that we maintain a positive or a neutral view when interacting with people. Because look, I mean, we all have characteristics, limitations, varying abilities, perhaps disabilities as well. And so the goal is to treat that person with a disability as you would any other person. And as you get to know them, you will become more comfortable interacting and knowing what their needs may be. So we want to use that neutral vocabulary or the person first language. You may also want to ask that person what they prefer, but in general, this is a good rule of thumb. So you might say person with multiple sclerosis, person who utilizes a wheelchair for mobility, person who experiences depression and anxiety. So we're focusing on the person, not their disability, as the main factor in identifying them. And additionally, when we give good customer service, we understand that people with disabilities are so diverse. So if you've met one individual with a disability, you've met one individual. So it's really impossible to predict what any single individual may or may not need without asking some questions first. So a good resource is the person themselves. They may know exactly what type of accommodations they need or strategies. They may know what has worked for them and what has not worked in the past. Now, this may not always be the case if the individual has just acquired this disability or may not be fully, maybe like a student who's not fully aware of what accommodations they have been receiving. But as a good rule of thumb, always ask the person. So a disability is a personal characteristic, just like gender, race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, and just like any of these other characteristics, the disability shouldn't have any effect on the way we interact with our customers. So in most situations, the rule of thumb, you treat that person with a disability as you would any other person without a disability. For example, if you normally ask your customers without disabilities if they need assistance on something, then you may ask that customer with the disability the same question. So here are key components of creating an inclusive environment in your offices. Making sure that the staff is trained, may understand their own implicit or even explicit bias, that they're comfortable working with people who have disabilities. Then looking at the physical facility itself, is the facility accessible under the ADA guidelines? Has an evaluation been done to ensure that the facility is accessible? So you may do things such as removing chairs at a conference table for someone who has a wheelchair, looking at the flow of the entrance and the communal spaces. Are there plants or furniture blocking the pathways for an individual to navigate? And is the service desk accessible? Are there multiple counter heights to include everyone? And are there accessibility stations with trained staff nearby that might have things like accessibility software, different styles of keyboards, mice, speech-to-text software, amplification on the telephone, large print copies, or maybe an induction loop, which helps individuals with hearing aids connect to the environment that's built into the room's audio system. So now looking again at some common improvements that we see when we do go out and do those ADA accessibility assessments, looking in the bathrooms to see, is the paper towel and the soap accessible to somebody who is using a wheelchair for mobility? Are they able to roll under the sink? Do parking spaces, are they clearly outlined? Are there a sufficient number of parking spaces? And is the signage at an appropriate height? Also looking at light fixtures and light switches. So sometimes we might see the light switch on the wall and it might be at the right height, but is there a plant or a garbage can blocking somebody's ability to reach that switch? Looking at the fire alarm, is there a visual signal as well as an audible signal? And again, the service height counters there on the right, bottom right corner there. Is the counter multiple heights to accommodate somebody of a shorter stature or someone who uses a wheelchair for mobility? And that brings us to our next case study on ergonomics and universal design. So oftentimes some of the ergonomic or solutions or accommodations end up benefiting more than one person, and that becomes universal design. Some examples of that might be curb cuts on our sidewalks are accessible to not only individuals who use wheelchairs, but also pedestrians, people on bicycles, or somebody pushing a stroller. So that would be considered a universal design that was born of a need to accommodate individuals with disabilities. So for this case study, this customer worked in an office and was experiencing chronic pain after working over a decade in the same position at the same desk and using what's considered a typical or standard desk. Oftentimes the desks are too high for women or individuals who are of a shorter stature. And so looking at the cubicle, the layout, everything was really not customized for this individual and placed her in compensatory postures. So what was noticed that she received relief after completing physical therapy, but as soon as she went back into her old environment, that pain returned. So what barriers might this person face, if you can go into your poll and answer, and what could be put into place to help this person out? Experiencing chronic pain seated in a desk that doesn't suit her.
Standing desk is one of the, what we have. Adjustable height desk. Adjustable and ergonomic chair. Pillows or padding that can be placed or removed. A Very desk, which is an adjustable desk with appropriate chair and footrest, frequent breaks to move around as needed.
Excellent.
Ability to sit and stand, often taking breaks as needed.
So definitely, you get the idea here. You're definitely on the right track as far as being able to change positions, sit to stand, be that by having an adjustable desk or simply, standing and stretching throughout the day if that's feasible. Other ergonomic equipment that can be implemented here. We have the sit to stand workstation on the left there, a laptop riser. So that raises the computer screen or laptop screen to eye level rather than having someone, oftentimes you see them hunched over their desk typing on a laptop, which really aren't meant to be used for long periods of time without some ergonomic equipment there. Also anti-fatigue matting for when an individual is standing. This reduces compression on the discs in the back. And it's really recommended that somebody only alternate positions, standing for about 15 minutes, really just changing positions every approximately hour or so throughout the day is a good tip. Also a footrest, which helps bring the knees to a 90-degree angle, hips at 90-degree angle in a neutral position, and encourages that individual to position their hips and back all the way against the back of the chair to maximize support. And lastly, an ergonomic keyboard helping to place the wrists and forearms in a neutral position and providing cushioning for the wrist to reduce that contact stress, which can lead to things like carpal tunnel or exacerbate already existing conditions there.
So we're going to talk a little bit now about assistive technology, and Angela just kind of moved us in a little bit. So what do we mean when we talk about assistive technology? And for what we're talking about today, I've come up with a bit of a definition because every single federal law that defines assistive technology, it's defined slightly differently. So what we're talking about right here, right now, is any kind of process, system, or equipment that will allow an individual with a disability to either maintain or improve their capacity, whether that's at a physical or cognitive level. So I guess I was asked to talk about the history of assistive technology because I'm the older one of the two of us, and unfortunately I've been around since quite a bit of the beginning of assistive technology. So initially when assistive technology came out, it really was a standalone device. It was often developed specifically for that individual. It was very pricey. A lot of times it would come from some type of a university that had a rehab engineering program or a program that was looking at computers, those types of things. And then as the technology grew, as the field grew, we started seeing standalone devices that are marketed. So if you look over on the left-hand side, these are communication devices that are just used for people who need a voice. So it doesn't do anything other than that. Down below, we have WinZoom, which all it does is magnify whatever's on your screen. If you look over to the far right, this is an Apple IIgs, which tells you how long ago I got into the field because that was brand new and was pretty exciting. And we thought we were hot stuff because we got a magnifying piece that went over the monitor to make things bigger for people who had visual impairments. And that's kind of where we've gone to. Then we look at a lot of the products that are developed specifically for individuals with disabilities require a lot of training and a learning process. So they can't intuitively just go and do it and use it. So Dragon is probably the most famous speech to text. If any of you have an iPhone and you use speech to text to send text, to type emails, that actually comes from the Dragon software. That Dragon actually facilitated that happening for not people without a typical disability. And if you see down in the middle of the screen, this is a Braille note taker. And again, it requires a lot of training. So there was a lot of work that went in before the person could actually ever be able to utilize it in a work situation. But what's happening now, and I think this is the most exciting piece for me, over 30 years in assistive. Yes.
Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you. I believe there are people in the chat that are having difficulty seeing the slides or the presentation.
Let me take it off and do it again then. How about that? Okay, let me share again. Let's see. It could be when I came back. Okay. And you let me know if you can see it or not. It's going to take a minute and we'll go back. But we think about a technology of today. There's a lot of technology that's built right into whatever you and I use. I don't know how many of you ever use the closed captioning on the television. That's built right into our television. It cost us maybe 15 cents on the cost of the TV, and yet we sometimes use it. I like to watch British shows, and one of my friends says, now it's time to be able to interpret the Scottish accent into British English so that we can do that, and that's it. Now, can everyone see the screen?
Yep, people are saying yes, they can.
Good. I don't know what happened, but we're going to get through. So when we think about vision problems, Any computer, laptop, tablet, smartphone is going to have accessibility features. There's going to be a magnification aspect. It might be called Zoom, it might be called something different, but they all have a way to magnify the screen. Now, if you're using a smartphone, that makes a very small what you can actually see. Text to speech is what reads what's on the screen. So for an individual who has a vision impairment, who might be dyslexic, who has difficulty reading, or we're also finding individuals for whom English is not their first language, it's a really helpful piece. Speech to text is when you and I talk and it types for us. A talking alert would be something perhaps that would let you know that someone is talking or not talking. I don't know about you, but sometimes I have a hard time finding where my small cursor is when I'm moving around and doing things on a white background, such as this particular presentation. So you can change the color and the size of a person's cursor so they can follow it. You can also adjust the background and the color of the font. So if you have someone who has a lot of issues with dyslexia, changing to a colored background will allow them to be able to see. One of my friends who found that out said, for the first time ever, the letters and the words are not dancing on the screen. It made a profound difference for her to be able to read. So that's really something that it comes right with whatever we have. For someone who has a hearing impairment, Angela talked about maybe, taking a break. I have done some ergonomic studies at Wayne State University, and I worked with people from the psychology department, and that was one of the things that we did. We built an alert to go onto their computers so that after an hour, they'd get an alert. Well, for someone who is hearing impaired, it would need to be either a vibration or a visual alert so that they could tell their time was up. A lot of people with hearing impairments are using FaceTime or video meetings to be able to communicate with each other. And a lot of them are using text to be able to communicate with those of us who don't speak sign language. There are many things, again, for people who have a physical motor disability. So there's something called slow keys. If you have an individual perhaps who has Parkinson's and they can't remove their finger off of the key fast enough so they get a whole line of a letter that they don't want, you can go into their accessibility center on whatever device they have, and that allows you to say, hey, don't count that being kept on there. You determine how long of a time they need to recover. Sticky keys would be something such as Control-Alt-Delete that I use to be able to sign into my work computer. For some individuals, they can't press them together. So if you activate the sticky keys, that allows them to press those keys in sequence, and the computer reads it as if they were simultaneously selected. A keyboard navigation allows you to be able to use an on-screen keyboard. All devices have them. Mouse keys allows you to use arrow keys or other things other than a mouse to control the keyboard. Again, you can use speech to text and those talking alerts. For individuals who have cognitive impairments or intellectual disabilities, they will often use a text to speech. You can have an audible calculator to help them. Those visual and auditory alerts will keep them on track onto what they need to be able to do. And the use of word prediction. So I don't know about you, but I find when I have friends on Facebook, and when I wish them a happy birthday, I must do the same thing every time because it'll tell me on my screen of my phone, and I just have to click on that word, and that speeds up the typing for individuals who would not necessarily be able to do that in a quick way. So what we've given you here are the accessibility for Windows, and you can, if you can just Google it as well. For Mac, we've given you where to go to look at what is available on those computers. For Android phones, we've given you access to that as well as iPhones as to how to get to them. They're not always the easiest to find. I've had multiple conversations with people from Microsoft about why they make it what they do, and we just had to have a difference of opinion on where it ends up. So if you have someone who comes to you who is hard of hearing or who does not speak, and you want to be able to know what they have, there are a couple apps. There's Speech Assistant, AAC, it's a $15 app, can be put on a phone or a tablet, and that will allow them to be able to utilize common words to tell you what they need to say. There's also the Flip Writer AAC Pocket, which is $25, but the nice thing about this is it allows you to see what they're typing and them to see what you're typing, and you don't have to turn the tablet or the phone up to the other, so the other person can see, unless you're able to read upside down, and then the other one would work just as well. There are a couple free apps for communication. There's an app called Glide. There's also Dragon Anywhere, which you can speak into, and it will automatically caption what you are saying so the person with the hearing impairment can read what you're saying.
And we use that Flip Writer quite frequently, Donna. We recommend it. It goes very well with an iPad or some kind of a tablet so that it's large enough and that people can speak into it if somebody is using their speaking voice, and it'll show up upside down on the screen for the other person to read. So that's really a great app there. So we're going to wrap this up with our final case study here. So this individual had a dual diagnosis, so a neck strain and low back pain due to a prior auto accident and degenerative disc disease. And also she had a diagnosis of a mood disorder with anxiety. And the vocation was an industrial setting where she was inspecting small parts for quality control and then operating machinery. So going back into our poll, what barriers might this person face and what could be put in place to help them? So somebody with a neck and back strain as well as anxiety due to a mood disorder. So what are we thinking?
I think they're thinking before they type, which is always good.
Yeah.
Repetitive neck movement is a barrier this person might face.
So in the chat, somebody wrote prevention, safety, a neck brace, perhaps, goggles, protective wear.
We've got limited reach or adjust the height of products.
Ergonomic chair. Okay, so I love what you're thinking, on the right track here. So we had a neck pain with repetitive neck movement, as somebody mentioned, but also prolonged positioning of the neck, looking down frequently, can lead to a strain on the neck and upper back and shoulders. This person also had back pain exacerbated by prolonged standing on a concrete surface. And then some symptoms consistent with anxiety with learning new tasks. She was new to the job, and just a general worry about the job performance not being satisfactory to the employer. And she self-reported some memory issues with learning the steps to operating the machinery. So when we did talk to the employer, we found that actually the business felt that she was considered among their most reliable and punctual employees. And so that was relayed to her. It was maybe just a little bit of a communication issue, and she needed a little bit more reassurance. We also looked at an adjustable height workbench or workstation to bring that work up to her level so she didn't have to bend over or look down frequently. Anti-fatigue matting, again, to cushion her when she's standing and reduce that compression on the discs of the spine. She had a small notebook already to write down the steps to operate each machine, and she was able to keep that with her no problem from the employer. And also the employer felt that they did have trainers who were patient and thorough and encouraged questions. Again, they felt that she was a great employee. And we also talked to her about some of her personal maybe responsibilities or suggestions, which was to have her vision examined to make sure her glasses were up to date, and to continue working on that self-advocacy piece, not being, timid when it comes to asking questions, and continuing counseling and meeting with her mental health provider for self-soothing techniques for her anxiety symptoms. So if you're thinking, when should I refer to MRS? Or what if this gets a little bit too complicated and outside my essential functions of my job? So if an individual is a job seeker that is struggling to read, having difficulty following directions, maybe difficulty keeping boundaries, challenges with focusing or attention, perhaps the communication is loud or soft or very difficult to understand, it would be a perfect time to help that person, refer them to MRS, but help make that connection. And then if you yourself as a staff member of Michigan Works are feeling constantly drained or burnt out, overwhelmed when dealing with this individual, perhaps annoyed or frustrated, something's not clicking when you're working with this customer, or confused about how to most effectively help your job seeker, we are available. We are your partners, and we're available for a referral. So when referring to MRS, if we already have that inclusive, connected relationship, this is a good partnership for us to have. So create a connection with your local MRS or BSBP staff, that's Bureau of Services for Blind Persons. Offer them regular hours in your facility, make it a voluntary connection. MRS is an option, it's not a requirement. The job seeker has the right to make that informed choice about their job search process and whom they'd like to receive services from. And just being upfront about when a reasonable accommodation request is very specific and maybe you don't feel that you have enough expertise in this area. So you could say, while I'm unable to help you with this specific request, we can make a referral to MRS, who has a little bit more expertise in that area. So also relying on your resources here. So Michigan Works isn't expected to be an expert in disability. MRS, we're here to help you and partner with you to achieve excellent outcomes for our customers. Here are some additional resources for you. The Job Accommodation Network, or Ask Jan, is federally funded and offers a lot of potential accommodation suggestions and information about various disabilities. Also as well, we are your partners, Michigan Rehab Services, the Bureau of Services for Blind Persons, or BSBP, and your disability networks or local centers for independent living.
So in summary, we just want to today in our conversations really talk about helping you all be able to be your best in helping individuals with disabilities. So, we've talked about lack of inclusion, possible biases or discrimination. And Angela told us and reminded us that disability can impact any of us and most likely will for at least a period of lives. We want to focus on the individual's ability, not what they can't do. Treating individuals with disabilities with the same kind of courtesy, patience, and respect as I know you do to other job seekers. In determining the language that you use, and Angela again talked a little bit about this, most people with a disability prefer person first, but there are some groups who are coming to the point, in particular people who are on the autism spectrum, as well as some hearing impaired individuals who prefer to be not person first, but you have to ask them and find that out from them. You need to have that conversation about that disability because ADA says the individual has to be able to do the essential elements of a job with or without accommodations. So those are the pieces that we need to focus on. We need to be respectful and ask questions. And remember that MRS is always happy to take referrals and work together with you to meet common goals. So thinking about what will you take back with you from our session today? And if any, what questions might you have or comments that we can have as a discussion today?
And I do see a couple of questions in the chat.
Thank you.
Linda is asking, do they have to have a documented disability? And I'm taking that to mean to qualify for MRS services, does somebody have to have a documented disability? Well, frequently our individuals do come in the door with some kind of documentation or awareness of their disability. But no, that's not necessary. There are criteria to be eligible. The MRS counselor can take that person through that eligibility criteria. But sometimes there are incidents where individuals may have had, say, for instance, dyslexia or learning disability for most of their life, but it was never documented or never even acknowledged or noticed. Additionally, sometimes adults may be on the autism spectrum, and that was not, noticed or paid attention to earlier in life. So sometimes we can help with obtaining that documentation, such as a neuropsychological evaluation or a functional capacity evaluation, to give us that documentation that we need to go off to best determine the path or accommodations that might be necessary. So hopefully that answers your question. What are the levels of criteria for the clients? I would like to ensure they are not frustrated with a referral that cannot go any further. So there is, again, eligibility criteria, but basically if the individual has a disability under the ADA and is seeking employment or is already employed and looking to either retain their job or advance in their career, that tends to be sufficient criteria. However, if you do want more specific information, reaching out to your local MRS office or your business relations consultant in your area to get a little bit of a consultation first. Like, hey, I'm thinking of referring this person. Do you feel that this person will be able to receive services? So that's one way to go about that. And then is there a general time frame from referral to the person getting partnered with an MRS career coach? Is there a general time frame? I believe a person would be assigned, immediately if to go through that eligibility criteria to determine if they are eligible. I'm not sure what career coach is referring to.
But you do like to get them through as frequent as 90 days is possible, if I understand.
Yeah, 90 days is our general rule for opening and closing a case. Some may require extensions, and the counselors are well versed in that area. And Tanya says, Michigan career or MRS career coach, meaning a counselor. Okay. So yes, as expedited as possible.
Hello, everyone. I don't know if you can hear me. Can you hear me? This is Rhonda from the Michigan Works Association.
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you. I don't see the little audio. So I would like to apologize for my technical difficulties. A little crazy this morning trying to ensure everybody could access the conference platform. I do want to thank Dr. Donna Case and Angela Blanchard for joining us this morning, as well as all of our attendees at the conference. There was a question related to sharing the PowerPoint. I know the whole workshop is being recorded, and I will confer with the presenters when we're done here to determine whether they wish to share that. I'd also like to give a shout out to Michigan Works Southeast. They actually sponsored this session for us today. Our sponsors helped make the conference happen, and we're really thankful for their support. We'd also like you to know that this is our break. There is exhibitor and networking break as well as your lunch. And we'd like you to take the time after this session to video chat with some of the exhibitors or watch their informational videos. Or you can go to the networking tab and pair yourself up with another attendee for a few minutes and chat with them as well. I did post the survey a few times, so we'd appreciate your feedback as well. Are there any other questions that anybody have?
Rhonda, I just wanted to add a little bit about referrals. We do try to expedite those job in jeopardy or retention cases. So if an individual is in a position where they may be at risk for losing their job due to a disability related barriers, then we do expedite those cases as well.
And I see somebody asked if the PowerPoint was accessible under the survey. No, it is not. That is just a form document related specifically to this workshop. If there are no more questions, once again, we appreciate you joining us for this workshop and appreciate our presenters, Dr. Donna Case and Angela Blanchard, for spending their time with us.
Thank you, everyone, for your interaction. Yes, thank you for coming.